So, man is unique. We look at what Scripture has to say about that. In Genesis 1:26 and 27, it said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God made man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. So if you stop to think about it, that's different than every other section in Genesis 1 when God was creating. All the other things that were created on days 3, 5, and 6 were created, quote, after their kind. Okay. Grass and trees were created on day 3, flying and swimming creatures on day 5, and land animals on day 6. Note that all these things were created in great profusion. They weren't, there wasn't like one cow or whatever. It was like all kinds of cattle, all kinds of creeping things, all kinds of flying things, all kinds of fishing things, or swimming things, fishing things, yeah. Anyway, so these were all created in great profusion to fill the earth with all these things. The creation of man was unique. See if we got to that. Nope, we didn't. Man was created in the image and likeness of God. He was created male and female, and there were only 2 individuals. And they were to have dominion over all the other created things. And in Genesis 2, all the animals were brought to Adam, and he gave them names. All right. I got to watch this. So, man was unique. The evolution of man is not unique. If you listen to the story on how we got where we are from men, what man says, man evolved from an ape-like ancestor over millions of years. Male and female types evolved even further back. So there were other, you started out with a single-celled creature, and somewhere along the line they developed sexes. And then farther down the line they developed backbones, and they developed legs and brains and all this sort of thing, and eventually you got to man. Evolution began with multiple populations somewhere in Africa or Asia, depending on which story you believe, whether it was out of Africa or out of Asia or whatever. And modern man is not the goal of evolution, but a fortunate happenstance of evolution. So we're not the tip of the spear, we're just something along the line, and over another million years or so, maybe something else is going to develop that's going to be better than us. Whatever, okay? That's the greatest lie ever told. You look at this, you think about, you got the theory of evolution were true. If it were true, you start here and you wind up here. So there are millions of these, there are millions of these, so where are the rest of them in between species? There are not millions of them. Oh yeah, they've been looking really hard, but they haven't found them. You're right, they aren't there. So you could put all the fossil evidence for our, quote, ape-like ancestors, and those are the guys between here and here, on a couple of 8-foot banquet tables. Because what the evidence is for them is teeth, jawbones, skull caps, a few skulls, and some recent limb bones. But that's it. That's the entire evidence for all of these people between here and here. And nobody really gets to look at them. The guys who found them, they're the ones in charge, and they're the ones who determine who can look at them, who can examine them. Most people do their analysis on plaster casts of them or pictures. So most of the guys who write these papers talking about Zejanthropus and Ramapithecus and all these other Ichthyosaurs, basically they're looking at teeth, jaw bones, skull caps, and maybe a few limb bones, and that's it. That's all they have. Now, you might hear about Lucy. Lucy was Australopithecus afarensis, okay? About 3 foot tall, and they found about 40% of the skeleton. But they didn't find the hands and feet, and so at the time, she was in our family tree, and so they gave her, if you go and look at the museums and stuff, you'll see her sitting there, 3 foot tall creature with human hands and human feet. In spite of the fact that later on they found feet and hands, and they were long fingers, they got the offset toe and everything, great for climbing trees, terrible for walking upright. In order to make her walk upright, they had to modify the hip structure, all right, in order to make that work. So when you see the picture of Lucy, don't believe it. It's a lot of imagination. So these are the ascent of man. These are some of the things that they found. Our common ancestor, no evidence whatsoever. Nothing. Ramapithecus, Dyrocaniopithecus, these are teeth, jaw fragments, and skull caps, approximately 14 million years ago, 500 cc brain case, about the same size as a gorilla. Tooth variation shows evidence of being hominid, but this is little evidence of being hominid. So if you want it to start looking like a man, you kind of promote it to be human-like. If you want it to be more ape-like, then you demote it if it was a human-type fossil. All right, you got Australopithecus, Zejanthropus, and Homo habilis. The same thing, teeth, jaw fragments, skull caps, and a few recent limb bones. 2 to 3 million years ago, teeth similar to Ramapithecus, limb bones show a long-armed, short-legged, nuggle walker. Modern-day baboon has the same tooth structure. But these are guys in our past. So, let's go back. You got Homo erectus, Java man, and Peking man, partial skeletons, teeth, and skull caps, 500 to about 10,000 years ago. Peking man was a big thing when they first found it, but guess what? All that fossil evidence disappeared before World War II and hasn't been found. So, you got Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon man, numerous whole skeletons, they say about 35,000 years ago. They actually, Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal man actually had larger brain cases than we do. So maybe they were the tip of the spear and we're on our way down, okay? And then you got Homo sapiens, they're all around. They say as old as 3 million years. They say bipedal locomotion dates at 2.5 by recent finds. He was a skilled tool maker. So were these guys. Skilled artists, they had religion, they took care of their dead, they cared for the ill. You know, these are people that now, the thing is, we'll talk about that later, but here's some pictures of our family tree. You notice how ape-like they look, I mean, at least in the face, all right? There's scant fossil evidence for any of these critters. We're looking at skull caps, teeth, and basically jaw bones for all of these people. Very, very, nothing else in terms of what the limbs look like or anything like that. So basically you're dealing with a skull cap, jaws, and teeth. And from that, they came up with all these guys. And that's why vivid is emphasized there, because basically you take what you found and you use some vivid imagination, and then you develop this evolutionary lineage of how we got to where we are. So think back to, look at some other pictures. Here's Neanderthals, and you see they're still kind of ape-like looking, even though they're kind of up and down, all right? But they kind of made the head look a little bit ape-like, so that, because they thought Neanderthals were in our recent past, but they were still ape-like. And they've since found recently that Neanderthal man was a skilled tool maker. He painted, he took care of his his ill people. They found evidence of trephination and splinting on broken bones and things like this to handle physical issues. They buried their dead, all right? And so everything that they found about these guys was like, these guys are pretty smart. And they did the genetic evidence, and basically it says there's virtually no difference between them and us. There's some differences in the chest and the, some physical things, but nothing that was related to say that they were significantly different than Homo sapiens. All right, so as Cro-Magnon and Homo sapiens, they did all these paintings and stuff. It was actually Cro-Magnons who did the Lascaux Cave. Now let's go back to this again. Let me see, okay? I survived, humans survived, but every form in between died off. That's pretty amazing. Just, it goes back to there were millions of these, and where's all the rest of this stuff? Well, the rest of the stuff is really, there's not much there at all. So why would evolution produce a species that worships God? Think about that. Man right now has got an inherent thing built into him that wants to worship something, whether it's the Creator or the creation. Man wants to worship something. Okay, so why would evolution come up with that concept? How did that work its way through so you wind up with somebody who worships God? The concept is quite foreign. And even atheists worship something. All right, now, anatomical changes to go from ape to man. You think about, you got a chimp, you got a gorilla, and you got a human there. And look at the things that you got to change. The skull. The skull is completely different. The attachment to the head. On a human, it's at the bottom of the skull. On ape types, it's at the back side of the skull, on the side, or the back of it rather than on the bottom. The spine structure, here we got the old double S. Over here, you got basically this kind of concave structure on both. The hands and feet, much smaller, much smaller. In the apes, you've got the offset toe for gripping, basically, things like branches and such. You got the long curved fingers for doing that. You look at the arm structure. Ours are much shorter. We got different hands, different feet. These guys are set up for either hanging in trees or walking. If they're going to walk, they walk on all fours, not on just 2 feet. And the last is the hip structure. You see the hip structure itself. This is completely different hips. The way in which the legs attach are completely different. So these are all the things that got to change in order to get from this to this. Basically a complete makeover of your physical anatomy. All right, and not only the bone structure, but also the musculature. So all of that stuff has got to change in order to get from here to there. And that supposedly happened over millions of years in slow and gradual changes. And don't bother us with the fact that we don't have any evidence for it. All right, the evidence that we have for it is basically up here. Most of the evidence is skulls, skull caps, jaws, and teeth. That's it. Most of the rest of this stuff, lots of these, and a lot of these, but in between, not a whole lot of any of that to show how that happened. How to tell a human skull from an ape skull. A human skull basically is kind of straight up and down, and it's got a nasal bone. Purpose of the nasal bone is so you can put your glasses on. All right? If that wasn't there, these would be down here. So you got a vertical face with protruding nasal bones. The ape has a slope face with a flat nasal bone. So you can see right away, you can tell the difference pretty quickly between an ape skull and a human skull. All you got to do is just kind of take just a quick look at it, and you can kind of look at that and say, ah. And you notice he doesn't have any place to hang his glasses. All right, here is our, quote, family tree. And what you see, that this is a, quote, interpretation. You got all these different skulls and all these different lineages and everything. And the dotted lines are assumed connections. All right, so what do you see on this thing? A whole lot of assumptions. Not a whole lot of evidence. But this is what is presented in the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C., is this picture showing us how we got where we are. When you start looking at the skulls, you can see pretty easily which of these are ape-like and which of these are more human-like. Okay? This is Homo rudolfensis. That's human. This is an ape, an ape, an ape, an ape, and there's a chimpanzee. And you can see most of the rest of these skulls are human. They talk about the brain case in terms of where we're at. Here's a Cro-Magnon, La Chapelle, Homo sapiens, Neanderthalis. Both of these have larger brain cases than Homo sapiens sapiens, a modern man. So, and when you think about the things that these guys were able to accomplish and the building and things that they were able to do, they're very smart people, you know, except that they don't fit into the story very well. So it should be obvious that God didn't create ape men. Ape men were created by man. There's scant fossil evidence for any of the immediate forms. Remember that? Go back to that picture. Let's see. We got millions of these. We got millions of these. We got virtually none of these. I survived. Man survived. And everyone in between died out. Simply amazing. Fossil evidence falls into one of two categories, ape or man. The true difference between apes and man is not physiological, although there's a lot of physiological differences. And God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, cattle, over all the earth, all creeping things. And so God created man in his own image. This is what we let off with. That's the difference between apes and men. Apes were created by God as part of the people that man was going to have dominion over. Man was created in God's image and likeness. That's the significant difference between apes and men. So it should be, what happened there? There we go. So how do you make an ape man? You start out with something here, and you got all these different lines, and you see how Neanderthal kind of tweaked off of that. So there's basically three ways that you can make an ape man. You can combine human and ape bones. Think Piltdown Man. Piltdown Man was a fraud that came about in the early part of the 19th century, where they took an ape jaw and a human skull and they kind of put them together. And nobody did a real good look at these because the teeth on the jaw were filed and they got down to the pith, and so if you'd have took a really good look at it, you know, you'd have said, oh man, that's not right. All right, they filed the teeth to make it look more human. So basically you had an ape jaw with human teeth and a skull cap. That was Piltdown Man. There were lots and lots of papers written on this, all right, until somebody actually went and looked at it in the 50s, and then it was like, oh, we can't have that. That's a fraud. Especially when they looked to see how they aged the jaw and the skull and all this sort of thing. They could tell what kind of chemicals they used to do it. All right, now this is one of the reasons why guys who find things don't let other people look at them. All right, the guy who found some of these skull caps and stuff like that, they'll make casts of them, they'll take pictures of them, and that, if you want to study them, that's what you get to look at. All right, so Piltdown Man was there for a while until somebody actually went and looked at it, and then it was debunked as a fraud. So that's one way to make an ape man. The other one is to upgrade ape fossils to human status, like Homo habilis. Okay? When they finally found some additional parts of Homo habilis, some leg bones and things like this, they found out it was an ape. Or you can downgrade human fossils to ape status. Think Neanderthal. They did that until they started doing some more study on Neanderthal, and they found out Neanderthal was actually quite technological. He was pretty swift. He was not an ape. So what's the genetic similarity? This just came out recently. You've heard the story that we're 98% similar to chimpanzees. I mean, that's been around for a long time. But the 98% only deals with about 2% of the total DNA. So, and it's protein coding, and there's only so many ways you can make a protein. You know, so if you're a designer, you're going to use a similar type of design to make a similar type of protein. Okay, so yeah, 98% was only 2% of the DNA that, now they didn't tell you the whole story. What made the headlines is we're 98% similar to chimpanzees, you know, which means that, you know, we got to be from them. Recent research completed an end-to-end sequence of the human great ape gibbon Y chromosome, and they show only about 26% similarity. And now the really wild thing is that 26% similarity also is the same as if you compared us to a chicken. Okay? Now why is that 26% the same? Once again, it's protein coding. So if you're going to code a protein and you want to code that protein for all types of living creatures, you'd probably use the same design if you were a master designer. And so when they started looking at these things, they found out, oh my goodness, maybe we aren't so similar. 26% is not enough to get you from chimpanzee to people. But if you live in the same environment, you need the same types of proteins and stuff to build and function, well, maybe you'd use the same design. The Y chromosome is the most non-variable and should be the least evolved of all of them. So that should have your history, and it's not there. Instead of being the most similar, it's the most different. The true difference between apes and man is not physiological or biological. It's the mind and soul given to him by God, the ability to communicate with his Creator, and only mankind's allowed to enter into a relationship with the Creator of all things. This is what separates us from the rest of the animals, is the being created in the image and likeness of God and having the ability to have a relationship with our Creator. Only we can join with the Apostle Paul saying, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also the Greek." No other creature on earth can say that except us. So how does human behavior differ from other animals? Think apes, once again, all right? Only man employs propositional language, uses verbal symbols, and makes sentences. Only man is discursive. He's the one who talks. Everyone else does not. Only man makes tools, builds fire, erects shelters, and makes clothing. Only man is technological. You know, some animals, you know, they use sticks and stuff to pry out. You know, you got otters who smack oysters on top of stones and stuff like that. They use some rudimentary things, but they don't get anywhere near this. Okay? Only man employs technology. Only man enacts laws, makes up rules to govern his social life. You know, all the other, if you will, if you look at bees and things like that, that's hardwired into them. They don't change things, they don't modify things. It's like, this is the way it is. So only man is political, which is a shame, because politics has really messed up our life. Only man has developed a cumulative cultural tradition. He's the only guy who keeps track of what he used to do. He's historical. He keeps record of things. Only man has a moral conscience and engages in ritualistic practices. Only man is religious. Only man adorns himself and his artifacts, makes statues, pictures for non-utilitarian. Only man is aesthetic. He's the one who can appreciate some of the stuff he's made. You know, you look at termite mounds, and the termites don't care. They know what it is that they need to do, and they build it. We look at it and say, wow, that's pretty cool, you know, for an insect. We look at honeycombs. We say, wow, that's pretty, and, you know, you look at those hexagonal things, and they're all, and you got this huge comb and everything filled up, either with honey or with new bees and things like that. You say, wow, that's pretty cool. But they don't care. That's hardwired in. They know what it is that they're supposed to do. And they don't sit back and go, wow, that's a really neat comb we did. You know? They just do it. We're the ones who can appreciate the beauty and the intricacy of what these other creatures have done, because we're the ones who look at that and say, wow, this is pretty cool. So, man is unique. He was created by God in his image and likeness. So think about the concept of race. Where did that come from? Where did we get the concept of a white race, a black race, a yellow race, somewhat in-between race, medium brown? I mean, you got Caucasians, you got Negroids, you got Orientals, you got Latinos, you know. Where did all that stuff come from? From the teaching of evolution. It's an outgrowth of what evolution is saying on how man is developed and how he has evolved from some ape-like creature to where we are today. And in between, you got white people, which are supposedly the most evolved. Now, think about who came up with this concept. White people. You know, we're the smart guys. We're the ones who developed this, so we're the most evolved. All right? When they were studying people around the world, where did they find the least evolved? Oh, they were in the dark jungles of Africa. They were out in Australia. They were Aborigines. So they were the least evolved, the ones that looked most like where we came from, apes. And so they are the least evolved. And so the whole concept of it's okay to treat them badly because they aren't as smart as we are. They're least evolved. They're more animal-like. Who cares? And in between, you got other races that were somewhere in between along the line of evolution, all right? And so, but they still weren't as evolved as the white guys, and so what do you get from that? You can treat them just as badly as you can some of the others, all right? That's where the whole concept of race came from. It was an outgrowth of the theory of evolution. You got less evolved races and more evolved races. That's where that came from. What did God say? We're made in the image and likeness of God. There are only two individuals to start, male and female. After the fall, population likely increased rapidly due to long lifetimes. If you look at the concept and you look at the genealogies in Genesis 5, where it starts talking about Adam lived 900 and some odd years, all right, and he had sons and daughters. And his sons lived a long time, and they had sons and daughters. And between then and the flood was about 1,600 years. They figure the world population at that time was probably closing in on about 800 million people. That's because you had lots of sons and daughters. You had lots of sons and daughters having sons and daughters, and these guys lived a long time. Okay, now some of them didn't start until late on. I mean, Noah was 500 years old when he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But we don't know if he had sons and daughters before that. And we know he didn't have any sons and daughters after that. But we know that all of these people had sons and daughters, and that the world population was building up. So what did he say? The major genetic reset after the flood, there were 6 individuals for today's 8 billion people. 6 people to 8 billion in 4,500 years. The different people groups are the result of dispersion at Babel, where people that had all of this genetic diversity built into them, those 6 people, separated according to language initially, and then kind of basically became inbred. So that genetic diversity was whacked down, and so you end up with people that have specific physical characteristics, eye shape, hair color, height, and that sort of thing, became kind of isolated because people were initially isolated by language. God confused their language at Babel, and basically all these people split up, and they just kind of went all over the place. Physical variations were enhanced by intermarriage in small population groups. Now the whole earth had one language, one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And they dwelt there, and they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks, and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar, and they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built, and he said, "Indeed, these people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do now. Nothing that they propose will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore the name is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. That is how we got to where we are today. When they left the ark, he said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." And man said, "Oh, not us. We're going to stick together, and we're going to be our own God." And God said, "Oh, you want to be that way? Okay." So we just basically confused their language and forced them to do what he wanted them to do, and that was spread abroad and fill the earth. So if we think about what happened at Babel, you had people going this way, down this way, out here. So if you look at the table of nations, you'll see a lot of these names. And the sons of Japheth kind of went this way, although they did go this way. Ham kind of went out this way. And Shem kind of hung out here, but then went east. Okay? So that's not to say that those are only the people who went there, because there were other people that got driven around as well, because they had different languages. So, but typically, you had the Japheth people over here, the Ham people over here, and the Shem people over this way. Okay? That's just generalization, all right? But if you look at the table of nations, you see that Japheth's people have most of these names. Ham has a lot of these names, and Shem has a lot of these names. So, and those, but the thing is those were only in this immediate vicinity. They don't talk about who wound up in North America, who wound up in China and Southeast Asia, and who wound up in Australia, and all this sort of thing. All right, what they talk about is how God dispersed the people that were all here on the plains of Shinar. And so each one of these people groups went out, and they basically had their own group. They intermarried in between them, and basically they started developing different physical characteristics in terms of eye shape, hair, skin color, primarily skin color, and that's what we wound up with. All right, that's where we are now. Now, this is mitochondrial human DNA, and it's kind of interesting. They did looking for variations and things, and they found out that there were 3 nodes that go back about 4,500 years. Guess who those 3 people were? They were the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You know, so I mean, this is real science. This isn't made up. This isn't once upon a time we started out as chimpanzees and wound up to where we are today. This is real science, where they were looking at the mitochondrial DNA, which is passed on from mother to mother. All right? So I thought I took them out. Well, anyway, those are my interpretations. So there are 3 people, the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So what did man say? Separate races are the result of separate populations, modern Homo sapiens in Africa, about 100,000 years ago. This is where the races developed, was as a result of evolution. Multiple individuals in original groups. They mated with other archaic human groups, Neanderthal, Denisovan, Homo erectus, during a migration, resulting in various races developing as they kind of migrated out of Africa and encountered some of these other groups. This is the out of Africa idea, where basically you started with a bunch of groups here, it came out this way, they went down here, over here, up there, and they kind of followed along sort of the same sort of thing, except they started back here. Instead of starting here and winding up there, they started from the opposite direction. So what does science say? There's no explanation for the apparent genetic bottleneck of 3 female individuals about 4,500 years ago. They have no explanation for this. How did we get there? All right, well, if you have a great flood and you got only 6 people that are left as a, if you will quote, the breeding population, that's how you get there. There's no explanation for the Y chromosome mutation rate in males that tracks to approximately the same time frame. Oh, amazing. And population dynamics data indicates it's possible to arrive at our present world population in less than 5,000 years, starting from 6 people. That is probably the biggest thing, that if we've been here millions of years, where are all the people? There's no explanation, and this is probably one of the biggest things for linguistic diversity. There are over 6,000 different languages that we've identified. How did we get to 6,000 languages? You know, if these guys started out with maybe 3 or 4 different populations and then they started, how did we get there? You know, do you know how difficult it is to try and develop a language? You got to come up with sounds that are right. You got to come up with syntax. You got to come up with grammar. You got to come up with all these. Think about the guys that do translation work for like SIM or some of these other mission agencies, and their job is basically to go in, study a population, and figure out how to develop a language so they can write it down, and that way they can get God's word. It takes them years and years and years to figure out all of that stuff. How did these guys develop that on their own without someone to help them? So what's a race? It's a people group defined primarily by outward appearance, skin tone, eye shape, hair color, facial features, and other physical features. Major groups are Caucasian, African, Latin, Latino, Aboriginal, Native American, Pacific Islander. That's what you would see if you pick up any kind of a government form. They want to know who you are. And then they have another thing for other. You know, I usually check that and put human. So you got all of these different things, and you look at these, and you see all these different characteristics. We're all one person. The things that define us, quote, racially, are all outward. There's very, very little that is different between us and the other. The concept of inferior groups has been around since the dispersion. Groups have enslaved other groups throughout history. The concept of race really took hold in the late 1700s. Darwin promoted this concept of evolved races. The most evolved was the white European race. The least evolved was the black African race. And others were somewhere in between. And it's been that way ever since. So it was okay to abuse the black Africans because they're less evolved. All right, it's okay to abuse some of these other people, the Chinese, other Orientals, because they're less evolved than we were. And you see that throughout history. Racial differences are purely superficial. There are no genetic boundaries. You can get blood from someone from a completely different race as long as the blood type matches. All right? So basically we're all, if you will, one blood. All races are similar distribution in blood types. Physiological characteristics are distributed across all races. Think about, let's just look at basketball players. All right? For a while, you had the white guys who were probably 6 foot, 6.5, somewhere around there. And then you got some of the black guys coming in who are 7'1", like Lou Alcindor and things like that. But now you got white guys that are at least that tall. You know, you got Asian guys, think of Yao Ming, you know, and things like this. Those physical characteristics are across all races, if you will, because the physical characteristics have nothing whatever to do with who you are. There's no mental or psychological differences. So what does God say? He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. So there are no races. We're all one people, created by God at the beginning. And we're done. So hopefully that gives you some insight into how we got to be where we are, how we got into these, if you will, this racial mess that we're in. We got into that because of physical changes, not anything related to who we really are in God's eyes. In God's eyes, we're all one people, we're all sinners, and we all need His salvation. So I hope that